Hello all. Thank you for tuning in for this session. Hope you're all doing well from wherever you are. With my interest in humanities and the world around us, today I'd like to share with you about something that matters to you and me, written language. Who doesn't use language to write? Even by assessing this video, you need to be able to understand written language. What if I were to tell you that there's more to written language than meets the eye? Let's start off the riddle, shall we? When I was young, I was told this riddle which I'd like to share with you. If you've heard of this riddle before, don't spoil the answer. Here's how it goes. A father and his son were out in the streets when the son got into an accident. His father frantically brought him to the hospital, where the boy was carried to the operating theatre. When the medical staff got to him, however, the doctor said, "I can't operate on him. He's my son." Why is that so? His father was outside at the waiting area. It couldn't have been him. If you have a guess to why this is so, do write it out in your head. Let's see if what you've concluded to is correct. Well, the answer is simple. The doctor was his mother. If you managed to arrive at the correct answer, congratulations. You weren't stumped by your preconceived notions like I was back then. I couldn't figure out the answer until it was told to me. If something as trivial as this riddle tricked me and made me forget that women can be doctors too, then what else can language affect the way I think? Written language influences the way we think more so than we realize. Written language is the language we write with, be it English, Korean, Russian, Spanish, and so on. It can be any language so long as it exists in written form. And written language shapes the human mind. It shapes our perception of the world around us. This begs the question, how does language shape our subjective perceptions of reality? So why am I talking about language and how it shapes our thinking? Language is the heart and soul of communication. That means a lot of our understanding of ourselves, each other, and of the world is built on language. The first complete writing system to date was found being used in Mesopotamia between 3400 and 3200 BC. Written language has been around for an incredible amount of time. It is our tool to communicate. We use it to share our opinion and ideas and to record them. Even when we speak to each other, that language can be and is presented in written format. Text messages, emails, transcripts, subtitles, closed captions. We cannot live without written language. We learn and we connect through it. And because of it, our thinking is influenced by written language. This means our thoughts about the world around us is influenced by written language. That's quite frightening, isn't it? That our thinking is unconsciously being shaped by the things we read. After all, they did tell us to read more to expand our knowledge. But we never really did realize that by reading, we unknowingly adopt biases and incorporate that into our beliefs. I'll focus on written language in 20th and 21st centuries. There is a marvelous history of written language spanning across centuries, but for now, we'll put our attention on modern day. Not only does this resonate better to us 21st century citizens, it helps us apply the understanding of written language and its impact on the human mind in today's context. After all, knowledge is power, but only when you can use it. I hope that after what I'll be sharing with you today, you grow more aware of the language you use, that you start questioning the preconceived notions and biases behind the words you use. Written language shapes the way we perceive the world because of the biases inherent in language that influences our preconceived notions. Written language shaping the way we think may sound like a big sudden revelation, but studies in this area have been around for quite some time. A major portion of it comes in the form of literary theories, which are studies of literature, a prominent form of written language. There was an emergence of literary theories in the 19th century, but it was in the 20th century that they rose in prominence. There were various movements of literary theories analyzing written language and how it shapes the way we perceive the world. Academics engage in discourses about the construction of knowledge and bring in the significance of language in this construction. Post-structuralism is one significant theory that questions knowledge and the way we think regarding language. It challenges the idea of inherent knowledge, that there's no fixed, stable meaning in language. In other words, it questions the idea of a single truth in portraying reality. We always talk about universal truth and how some things are universal. But are they really? Or are they just biases that make us think they are universal? For example, when someone gets hurt and needs to call the ambulance, what is the most iconic number we call? 911. It's a universal number for the ambulance and police, isn't it? Wrong. 911 has indeed been popularized all over the world by America, especially in popular culture like books and movies. But it isn't a universal number. Not exactly. In places like the United Kingdom and Singapore, the correct number is 999. Of course, because of how regularly people are now using 911, 911 calls can be routed to 999 in some countries who use 999 and don't use 911 as their default emergency number. This shows how our thinking is shaped by language to believe something as a universal truth, the 911 number in this case. But as we can see, it is not the truth. The world is just accommodating according to our thinking, which makes it feel universal. Another example is this. When you read this word, chair, what comes to mind? I bet you that every one of you is thinking of a different chair. A leather chair, a wooden chair, a wheelie chair, all different types of chairs. There's no single universal image of a chair, just different images that have some semblance to each other. And some chairs look nothing like the chairs we're used to. But you can't deny that they're all chairs. This echoes the concept of the signified and signifier. Coined by Ferdinand de Saussure, this concept helps us understand how written language shapes our thinking. The signifier is a sound image and the signified is a concept. These two come together to form a sign. Using the example of a chair, the word chair is the signifier. The image of the chair you conceive in your mind is the signified, and the chair itself is the sign. What I want to draw your attention to is how one signal signifier can manifest countless signifieds. And that is what I want to explore today. How does written language shape the way we perceive the world? How does it shape the biases we have? My perception of the world is different from your perception of the world, and we don't even realize it until we bring it up. Bringing back the riddle to the conversation. Written language makes many of us think that the doctor could not have been the boy's parent, because our first thought was that the doctor was not a woman. But there are many women doctors, and forgetting this fact can be more harmful than we think. In a way, we render female doctors invisible and erase their presence and significance in society when in fact they have contributed so much to the world. According to OECD, in 2015, almost half of the doctors in OECD countries on average are women, the highest being Latvia, being 74.3%, and the lowest being Japan, with 20.3%. Despite the disparities, it is undeniable that the healthcare sector is comprised of a high percentage of women, and yet some of us still carry gender biases. It's incredibly difficult to unlearn some of these biases, and that shows how powerful written language is in shaping the mind, especially without us realizing it. And with this power, written language has also created hierarchies produced through language. In this structure, it creates power dynamics that can even cause power imbalance in some cases. And what better way to challenge these dynamics by interrogating them? To look at how written language shapes the human mind, we obviously need to look into linguistics. We can't make a good meal without knowing what our ingredients are and what our kitchen tools are for. In linguistics, There's a concept of markedness which explains how words are changed or added to in relation to other words. The regular word would be unmarked, and the irregular word would be marked. For example, the word steward would be an unmarked term, while stewardess would be marked because the latter word is changed in relation to the former. This means the steward is the default, and the stewardess is an addition in relation to the steward. The unmarked terms are the dominant and default ones in the unmarked-marked relation. The marked terms, as a result, are secondary, irregular, and othered. This might seem insignificant and irrelevant, but it has a larger impact on our lives than we think. When you apply this idea to real life, to certain social groups, this creates a problematic perception of them. Bringing back the riddle on the doctor once again, when I say doctor, you might have first thought of a male doctor. When a doctor is a woman, it is typical to say female doctor. Even when I say firefighter, chef, scientist, professor, is it a woman or a man that first comes to mind? Chances are you'd first think of the male counterparts. I'm no exception to this either. I have my fair share of making the wrong assumptions and assumed a person to be male until it turns out that they were female. Markedness is ingrained in our preconceived notions, which in turn affects the way we think and perceive the world. We associate people and things with certain traits based on their gender, or rather, based on our so-called universal knowledge about gender. This is a snippet of a conversation I've had with a friend a few weeks ago. Not once did I tell him the gender of my professor, but he automatically assumed that my professor was a man, when in fact it was a woman. It is an offhanded comment, and I know that he's far from a traditional person, but it made me stop and reflect. We can be as open-minded and progressive as try to be, but unconsciously, there are things we are conditioned to believe through written language. If we want to change, we need to do it actively and consciously. Of course, this issue has been addressed for some time already. There have been shifts made to the written language that try to eradicate markedness. The term fireman is used less often now and is instead replaced by firefighter. Flight attendant is being used instead of steward and stewardess. Keep an eye out for these terms next time. Perhaps you notice the markedness in some words or the gender-neutral version of them. By making written language more gender-neutral, we try to reduce the gender dichotomy in it, which will in turn make our thinking more gender-neutral and fair. There's also been a fascinating experiment on this topic that I'd like to share with you. Dr. Lena Boroditsky has done extensive research on language and how it shapes the way we think. She compares the use of gendered nouns in German and Spanish and finds that those nouns are described with words associated with their respective genders. The noun bridge is masculine in Spanish, but is feminine in German. When asked to describe a bridge, Spanish speakers tend to use masculine attributes like strong or sturdy, while German speakers use feminine attributes like beautiful and elegant. How confusing and mind-imploding it must be to realize that someone else describes the same bridge as masculine when you've described it as feminine your entire life, or the other way around. My head hurts just thinking of it. Just because you believe something to be true all your life doesn't mean it is accurate. It's just what you've grown up thinking because of the way the written language you use is structured. As such, we need to realize that written language has a strong hold on our perceptions and thinking, even when we think it doesn't. If we keep believing that certain knowledge, such as the ratio of men to women in an industry, is the same everywhere and will not be changed, then our thinking will not change and will not be open to change, let alone progress. But of course, gender is just one of the many areas that written language has influenced our thinking on. Let's play a game before we move on to the next segment. Time to put your creative writing to the test. I'd like you to describe a person to me. When I say who I want you to describe, take the first image that comes to your head and write it down. The person I want you to describe is a woman. That's it. Just a woman. Hold on to the first image that pops into your mind. I want you to describe what she looks like. What is the color of her hair, her skin, her eyes? What is the texture of her hair? How would you describe her facial features? You can be as descriptive as you like. What have you written? Something I've noticed, not just in this conversation with you, but with many other writings I've come across, is the racial bias in them. Fair or light-colored skin, soft hair, blue eyes. These are the general traits of Caucasian women. Many of us, myself included, may not always write with color. We forget to include and embrace racial, ethnic, and religious diversity in our writing. And that too is a form of invisibility perpetuated by written language. Let's jump into the more theoretical parts. Have you heard of postcolonialism or postcolonial theory? If you haven't, it's a theory that studies the cultural legacy of colonialism and imperialism. To summarize, it focuses on the human experiences and consequences of people who are colonized. One aspect of postcolonialism looks at how written language, particularly the English language, perpetuates racism and racially charged ideas. We can't talk about postcolonialism without talking about Edward Said, who spearheaded the post-colonial criticism in Western discourses. In his book Orientalism, he addresses the concept of the Orient. The Orient refers to the East, which consists of Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. Said argues that there is a prominent racial dichotomy between the East and West, where the West is, borrowing from the concept I used previously, unmarked and dominant, while the East is a marked and non-dominant one. Said also mentions a use of stereotypes on the Orient. If you watch Aladdin and other films about the Middle East, then you know what I mean. Cliched, stereotypical depictions of the Middle East. Even this beloved Disney film is a prime example of Orientalism. What is portrayed in Aladdin isn't what the Middle East is actually like. As such, these depictions are expressed through written language. When we read about the Orient, we take these ideas as universal and true, which shapes the way we perceive the Orient. I'd now like to draw your attention to a particular theorist in this field. Audre Lorde, a renowned queer black feminist, once said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." What does this mean? Upon first read, it looks quite complicated. What does she mean by the master's tools and the master's house? To provide some context, the quote came from an essay where she criticizes racial injustice in America and the challenges that black people undergo to fight for their racial rights. She addresses how social justice cannot be achieved if they fight in a system that is built on racism and is maintained by their oppressors. As such, the master refers to the people in power, the authority, those at the top of the social hierarchy. The master's tools symbolize the people who have been colonized and controlled, as well as other products of society that serve to maintain those in power. And the master's house refers to society, the capitalist, male-dominated, and Western society. What Lorde means is that those oppressed in society we live in cannot go up against those in power if they continue to uphold the system and perpetuate things that are meant to undermine them. Lorde wrote this essay in 1984. 36 years. It's been 36 years since she addressed this issue, and it remains to be an issue today. It's unfair to live in a world where the language we use every single day undermines our existence, some more so than others. We can't make language more inclusive if we continue to use words, imagery, and more that depict the world in a racist way. It is difficult to overcome all our biases and preconceived notions if we continue using the written language that we have been taught all our lives. However, it is impractical to completely stop using written language and the writing system altogether. Still, not all hope is lost. According to Lorde in the same essay, to make the world more inclusive of those who are different, of those who are othered, we need to embrace our differences and use them to advantage. Instead of undermining what makes us different, we need to enhance them and make them our strengths. There are of course many ways to do this, though I can currently only provide the perspective of an individual. We can still enact genuine change from the inside and slowly make language more inclusive. Language is not fixed. It's a fluid entity that changes over time. Even now, we come up with new words and slangs that are incorporated into the written language. If we can seamlessly make changes to the written language according to trends, why can't we do the same to social issues? And genuine change is certainly possible. In recent years, there has been a shift in the way labels are used. The word slave is now being replaced by enslaved person. It may seem like a small difference, but it changes the way we view the subject. The person is humanized to the language and is no longer reduced to the identity of a slave. Written language helps us become more empathetic towards people, and in time, these small differences will accumulate and cause a significant change in our thinking and how we perceive the world. Now, I've talked about how written language shapes the way we perceive gender and race. There are so many more social concepts I can explore. Race and gender are incredibly relevant topics in today's world, which is why I want to talk about them. But now, I want to shift our focus to something that is less obviously relevant. When you fill up your personal details, besides writing down your name, gender, and ethnicity, what is the one other thing that they always ask for? It's age. Age is something that is not explored in a way race and gender have been. But I want to bring your attention to it because it's something I've noticed. When it comes to social hierarchies, we don't talk about age as much. One of the more obvious ways this is demonstrated in is textbooks. If you compare a textbook for a primary student to that of the same subject of a secondary student, you can see the differences. The language will be more complicated. There will be more use of technical jargon with longer and more detailed passages. The written language is carefully and painstakingly crafted to suit those of the specific age range. One's age determines the difficulty and depth of language they're capable of comprehending. Written language is sometimes even measured by age. The language politicians use is often analyzed in terms of age, 6th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade, and so on. As such, we determine someone's intelligence based on a level of language they use in relation to their actual age. But that is still a rather universal view. There is diversity in learning abilities and mental capabilities within one single age group. Just because one uses and understands language that is simpler than expected of them. Just because one uses and understands language that is simpler than is expected of their age doesn't mean they are less intelligent. Likewise, someone using language that is more complex than is expected of their age doesn't mean they are intelligent. They are so linguistically, but it doesn't automatically indicate their intelligence in other departments, such as emotional and cultural. As such, we shouldn't judge someone's intelligence solely based on the level of language they use. So no matter who you are, what age, race, gender, or other background you come from, written language will have a play in the way you think. When put in that way, it does sound a little scary and hopeless, but don't worry, it isn't. So this is all very fascinating, but can we make this information a little more relevant? What does this have to do with you or me? You may not be studying linguistics. English may not be your first language. You may not speak German or Spanish either. What can we do with this information? The answer is, make the world more inclusive. Written language still shapes the way we think. It is probably inescapable that our thinking will be influenced by it to some extent, as long as we read and write. But what we can do is be more conscious about it. How can we think differently? What can we do to become more aware of our biases? But so what if we become more aware of them, you ask? As I've mentioned right at the start, language is the heart and soul of communication. We use language to understand each other. And since written language affects the way we view other people in terms of gender, age, and race, what does this imply about our understanding of people? What does this imply about the conventional understanding of people of certain genders, races, and ages? As you have understood at this point, it is the biases in written language that perpetuates the biased ways we see the world. But we need to use written language. We can't just create a brand new language with nothing. Is there really nothing we can do? Worry not, for it is a two-way street. There is a symbiotic relationship between our thinking and language. Written language shapes the way we think, but the way we think also shapes written language. Our interaction with language does not happen in a vacuum. As demonstrated in the examples I've given, our thinking is changing written language as much as it is changing us. And this exchange will continue to happen as long as we continue to think critically about the language we write. What kind of language should we adopt to have a more inclusive and harmonious society? And where should we start? The first step to change is always to be aware of it, and you've already done that. You cannot make changes to yourself if you haven't even realized what it is that you need to change. The second step is therefore to confront the way you think. You know what you need to do, but you need to figure out where have you made your assumptions and what not. Look at the things you've written, in your papers or even your text messages. It's more fun to look at the things you've written in your messages, especially people you're most close to, because that is where your awareness about the language you use is usually at its lowest, which is where the biases and assumptions are most obvious. Were there biases you haven't realized? When you refer to someone theoretical, or someone you don't know the gender of, what do you use? He, she, he or she, or they. When you talk to someone you don't know on the internet, don't be so quick to assume the kind of person they are. Likewise, when you talk to someone you know the gender, race, or age of, don't assume the character based on associations you have been led to believe. Those associations don't necessarily have to be harmful or offensive to affect the way they think of you. If you interact with them based on those associations, they're likely to pick up on it and make their assumptions about you. Of course, not all associations and assumptions are bad. When done mindfully, they can reflect well on you. If you assume a professor's character based on the work and research she has done, rather than on her being a woman of color, you're likely to make yourself an excellent intellectual friend. The key is to make sure those assumptions are based on what someone does and not what someone inherently is. Another important and useful thing you can try out is fact-checking. The next time you think that something is true because it just is, or it has always been that way, think again. Has it always been that way, or is it just that you've been led to believe it is? There's only one way to find out, which is by fact-checking. By finding and verifying information, can you tangibly and correctly determine whether your beliefs are accurate? It's frustrating and even counterintuitive to question your ideas, but that is how we improve our thinking and gain accurate knowledge. If you've been eating burnt eggs all your life, but don't change the way you cook them, then you'll never experience what it's like to have delicious eggs. If you don't learn to cook them properly because eating burnt eggs is always something you've done, and you don't want to admit that you've been making them wrong, then your cooking will never improve, and neither will your life. So how do you fact-check? Simple. Google. Go onto a search engine and ask questions to verify whether what you know is true or not. But make sure to go to proper, credible sources. As such, we can shape written language by changing the way we write. It doesn't have to be drastic. Our thinking is changed through habits, and habits are cultivated by small changes and efforts. Rome wasn't built in a day. We need to put constant active effort into changing the way we perceive the world. And don't feel dejected if you made a mistake or made false assumptions. We are human. We aren't perfect. The most important thing is to acknowledge that mistakes have been made and learn from there. Progress isn't built on success on every try. It is built on failed tries and success that is built from said tries. Written language affects our perception of the world and the people in it. The power of written language is pervasive. It affects almost, if not all, aspects of our lives. But that doesn't mean we can't change the way it shapes our thinking. we have the power to change the way language is written. If it weren't possible, language would not have evolved like how it has. Every little effort we put into changing how we perceive the world together will influence the way written language depicts said world. Hopefully in the future, when someone asks you the riddle about the doctor again, you will be able to give the correct answer immediately. Sometimes it is these little moments that really reveal your biases and the biases created by the world we live in. Language is a tool of communication. In fact, language is communication. If it is unfair and biased, then so is the way we talk to and view each other. By changing what and how we write about each other, we change what and how we think about each other. What kind of thoughts do you want to create?